Ferdinand Porsche was the third child of the tinsmith Anton Porsche and his wife Anna. His parents' house was in a Bohemian village, Maffersdorf, close to Reichenberg. His father was a firm believer in a strict Victorian upbringing, and obedience was the order of the day for all 5 children. After the unexpected death of his elder brother, Ferdinand Porsche's future career was virtually decided. He too should become a tinsmith and one day take over the family business. However, in spite of his tender years, he was 14 at the time, young Ferdinand had quite different ideas from his father. He was a great experimenter, but much to the annoyance of his father, not with things which had anything to do with a tinsmith's trade, but with electricity, which at that time was in the process of being commercialized. His father forbade this dabbling about, and Ferdinand beat a hasty retreat to the attic, where he could carry out his experiments in peace. When he was 16 years old, he caused a minor sensation. While his father was away for a few days on a business trip, Ferdinand installed electricity in the whole house. Imagine his father's surprise when he returned home to find the house ablaze with light. It was the only building in the whole village, apart from the local carpet factory, to have electric light. From that moment on, Anton Porsche was convinced of his son's ingenuity, and in 1893 he let his son enter into an apprenticeship with Bela Egger & Co. in Vienna. 4 years later, he started to work for the Royal Coach Building Company, Jacob Lohner, which had just established a department for electric coaches to keep up with the times and to satisfy the growing interest of the upper class for cars of this type. However, because at this stage petrol engines were extremely noisy and unreliable, Lohner preferred to use a battery drive. Ferdinand Porsche designed a car for Lohner, which at that time was absolutely unique. It was presented at the Paris exhibition in 1900 and caused a sensation. One report spoke of the epoch-making novelty does without gears, belts, chains, differentials, etc. It's the first car without a transmission. This has been made possible by the Porsche electric engines, which are installed in the hubs of the front wheels and provide front-wheel drive. The hub engine, which Porsche had designed for Lohner, became a catchword at that time and very quickly made the 25-year-old Porsche famous in the motoring world. This hub idea appears in various forms in the first 15 years of, and very quickly made. We come across the same idea, not only in the 1900 racing cars, but also in fire engines, trolley buses, and at a later date, in the heavy mobile generator units for artillery in the First World War. At the age of 30, Ferdinand Porsche went in 1906 as technical director to the Austrian Daimler Engine Company at Wiener Neustadt. At this company, he further developed the new drive principle. He constructed petrol-electric mixed cars. The petrol engine drove a dynamo which passed on current without gearing to the hub engines. Ferdinand Porsche was not only a good craftsman who put things right when they didn't turn out to his satisfaction, but he was also a brilliant car driver. In September 1900, he drove an electric car along the Semmering mountain course and set up a new record. At the Exelberg races in 1901, he won the Class 4 cars under 1,000 kilograms. And at the Imperial Maneuvers in 1902, he served in the reserve infantry of an elite regiment as driver for the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He drove the Archduke in a car of his own design, for which he received a note of thanks in the personal handwriting of His Imperial and Royal Highness. One of his biggest successes for Austrian Daimler was in 1910. At that time, one of the best-known endurance tests was the Prince Henry course, named after the car-driving enthusiast Prince Henry of Prussia. An Austro-Daimler team took part in this race in 1909, and the technical director, Ferdinand Porsche, sat at the wheel of one of these cars. He won the silver badge of honor, but he wanted still more. He wanted the overall victory. He then immediately designed the car for the Prince Henry course for the following year. And his wish came true. In 1910, his Daimler was placed first, second, third in this event, with Ferdinand Porsche at the wheel of the victorious vehicle. He had given it a so-called tulip shape. It was the forerunner of the streamlined car. Ferdinand Porsche often took part in races and always tried and tested his latest second, third. In this way, he was the best and severest critic of his own designs. In 1903, Ferdinand Porsche married, and in 1904 his daughter Louise was born. And 5 years later, in 1909, his wife gave birth to a son, Ferdinand Ernst, called Ferry. It was on the eve of the First World War. At that time, Ferdinand Porsche was not only involved with car construction, but also with the designing of airship and aircraft engines and generator units for artillery. The first Austro-Daimler aero engines were produced in 1910 and became well known throughout Europe. As early as 1912, Ferdinand Porsche designed an air-cooled aircraft engine with 4 horizontally opposed cylinders and hanging valves, a design which basically corresponds to the later Volkswagen engine. It was for Skoda in Pilsen that Ferdinand Porsche designed the transporter for a large 30.5 centimeter motor. The engine had 100 horsepower and was able to move 24 tons. In the years 1915 to 1917, the so-called Sea Train was developed under Porsche's technical direction. This unit was used for transporting 42-centimeter howitzers. It had iron wheels for street and rail use, all wheels being driven. It had a generator unit with 150 horsepower, and Porsche once again used the mixed system for transmitting the driving power produced by the petrol engine to the electric engines in all the wheel hubs of the whole train. Emperor Franz Joseph awarded Ferdinand Porsche the Officer's Cross of the Order of Franz Joseph in most gracious acknowledgement of outstanding services to the armed forces. He became managing director of the Austrian Daimler factory and was awarded the title of Honorary Doctor of the Technical University in Vienna. In 1921, Ferdinand Porsche developed a very small sports car with 1,100 cubic centimeters, which was given the name Sascha. With this car, Austro-Daimler came first and second in the special class at the Targa Florio. From this time on, Ferdinand Porsche was always a pioneer of the modern small car. In 1923, he went as technical director and member of the board to the Daimler Motor Company in Stuttgart unter Türkheim. It was strangely enough through Sicily that he found favor and recognition in Stuttgart. He improved a 2-liter racing car engine with compressor to such perfection that the Daimler works driver Christian Werner won the 1924 Targa Florio with this vehicle. It was during the Porsche era that Daimler developed several of their well-known vehicles. The S and SSK sports cars with compressor, large diesel engine trucks with astonishingly high performance, and laid the groundwork for future aero engines. After the merger with Benz, things no longer went so smoothly for Porsche at Daimler, and in 1928 he left to become head designer at Steyr. A Viennese newspaper wrote at the time, "One of the largest car factories in the world has succeeded in landing one of the greatest designers in the world." In 1929, the house bank of the Steyr company collapsed. After various arguments with the new finance people in the company, and although times were anything but easy, Ferdinand Porsche set up his own business in the year 1930 and opened a design office in Stuttgart. Porsche's closest colleagues went with him to Stuttgart and formed a team of engineers which, under his direction, developed some extremely famous designs. Already in 1931, the Zündapp company assigned Porsche the task of constructing a small car. Although only a few prototypes were developed, the car had several things in common with the later Volkswagen Beetle. The vehicle which Porsche designed for NSU in 1933 was almost identical in appearance to the Volkswagen Beetle and was based on the same design principles. One of these cars is still running today. In parallel to his activities for NSU, and without any firm contract, Ferdinand Porsche and his team developed a racing car engine which was later taken over by the Auto Union. It was the 16-cylinder racing car with V-engine at the rear and with torsion bar suspension, which Stück and Rosemeyer drove on all racing circuits in Europe, and between 1934 and 1937 set up numerous world records. It was at this time, in 1932, that something quite unusual happened. Ferdinand Porsche was invited to Russia to visit various vehicle, aircraft and tractor factories, and during this visit he was offered the position of chief designer for the Soviet Union. However, Ferdinand Porsche turned the tempting offer down. In 1934, Porsche received a contract to design the Volkswagen. There were only limited funds available for the project because, understandably, the German car industry was not exactly enthusiastic about the idea of a people's car, which would compete with their own small and medium-class vehicles. Porsche, therefore, had to design the car on a shoestring budget, and the first prototypes were built by hand in the garage of his private home in Stuttgart. After these prototypes had undergone extensive tests for over a year under all types of weather conditions, a further 30 vehicles were produced in a Daimler-Benz factory in 1937 under the supervision of members of the Porsche team. These vehicles were driven millions of kilometers in the course of endurance tests conducted by the Porsche driving team. The fourth series of vehicles culminated in the world-famous Beetle as we know it today. In 1936, the decision was taken to build a special factory and city for producing the Volkswagen, the so-called people's car. Ferdinand Porsche was awarded the overall contract for this assignment. Porsche had never been interested in politics. His one real interest in life was solving technical problems. The volume of design assignments increased to such an extent that Ferdinand Porsche was obliged to build a small factory in Stuttgart, in which prototypes could be developed. It was here that the designs for mini-tractors with air-cooled diesel engines, aero engines and wind-driven electricity generators with self-adjusting vanes were developed and tested. Porsche also assisted in the design and construction of a series of tanks and military transport units. Before the end of the war, the offices and workshops of the Porsche company were transferred from Stuttgart to extremely primitive barracks in Gmünd in Kärnten. After the war, Ferdinand Porsche was interned by the Americans and later arrested and imprisoned by the French for 22 months. In 1947, when he was released on bail, his health had suffered a great deal. 1946, Ferry Porsche and a select group of former colleagues took up the threads of the old operation. Ferdinand Porsche returned home to find the completed blueprints for a sports car and the Cisitalia waiting for him. It gave him a great deal of satisfaction to see how his son and the old Porsche team had carried on his work in his absence. "I wouldn't have put one single screw in a different place," he said at the time. At the Geneva Motor Show, for the first time in 1949, a car bearing the name Porsche was on display. The Porsche 356 was the first of many cars to make the name of its designers renowned throughout the world. During his last years, Ferdinand Porsche witnessed how his life's work flourished and came to fruition. He was very moved the first time he saw thousands of Volkswagen Beetles on the streets. Ferdinand Porsche lived to see the beginnings of the Porsche company as we know it today, before he died in 1951 in Stuttgart at the age of 75. During his life, Porsche was able to realize a host of ideas and plans, but his wish to become a centenarian, because he still had so much to do, did not come true. Ferry Porsche, his only son, then became head of the company. At that time, the cars were still being produced in rented premises in Stuttgart-Zuffenhausen, but the resounding success of the 356 necessitated the construction of new factory buildings and a constant increase in the size of the working force. The sports car, which was originally only designed to be produced in small numbers, became extraordinarily popular. The original 1100 cubic centimeter engine was constantly further developed. The name Porsche was already firmly established in the world of car racing. Porsche was a synonym for quality, performance and success. In 1953, the 1500 RS Spider appeared, then the 550, the 718 and the RS 60. This deep involvement in competition racing made a significant contribution in terms of ideas and improvements for production line models. By 1954, 5,000 Porsche 356s had been manufactured. By 1956, no fewer than 10,000. In 1959, 32 vehicles a day were being produced in Zuffenhausen, and already in 1962, Porsche clocked up 50,000 vehicles. During this period, work was being carried out on a new model, the 911, which was designed to incorporate all the tried and tested features of a Porsche car. This car, with a 2-litre 6-cylinder engine developing 130 horsepower, made its debut in 1963 at the Frankfurt Motor Show. It was just the reverse of a mass-produced product, a superb sports car combining classic symmetry with perfectionist attention to detail. Later, various derivatives based on the 911 were introduced, the T, S and E models. However, the most significant addition to the 911 range was the Targa, launched in 1965. Here, for the first time, was a cabriolet with the appeal and safety features which up till then had only been associated with coupes. From then on, there was also a 4-cylinder derivative with the model designation 912, incorporating an improved version of the 356C engine, developing 90 horsepower. This was followed in 1970 by a 2.2-litre engine with mechanical fuel injection. By this time, the next generation of Porsches was working for the company. The oldest son, Ferdinand Porsche, was in charge of the design department. Peter Porsche was production manager, and Ferry Porsche's nephew, Ferdinand Piech, was responsible for development. In 1969, a mid-engine sports car, the Volkswagen Porsche 914, was introduced and offered with either a 2-litre 6-cylinder engine developing 110 horsepower or an 80-horsepower four-cylinder power unit. Both this model and the Porsche 911 were marketed by the Volkswagen Porsche Sales and Distribution Company in Ludwigsburg, which was jointly owned by Volkswagen and Porsche. In 1975, the Porsche company acquired Volkswagen's 50% of the equity and thus assumed complete control over the sales and distribution operation. People have repeatedly asked why Porsche is so active in the field of racing. When Ferry Porsche was asked this question, he replied, "We don't take part in car races to gratify our own self-esteem. On the contrary, we believe that car racing contributes and promotes the development of vehicle design. That's the reason why our prototypes and new designs are not just tested on our own proving grounds. They are also tested in terms of their performance in comparison with the standards and achievements of their competitors on the racetrack. Every single one of the cars we produce benefits from our experience on the racetrack." It has long been one of Porsche's policies in connection with car racing to always enter the best cars. Ever since 1951, Porsche cars have established a reputation on the world's most famous racing tracks: Le Mans, Targa Florio, Daytona, Silverstone, Monza, Nürburgring. And the list of Porsche drivers reads like an extract from the racing drivers' who's who: Sterling Moss, Dan Gurney, Graf Berger von Trips, Hans Hermann, Richard von Frankenberg, Gerhard Mitter, Joe Ziffert, Edgar Barth, Mark Donoghue, Jochen Maas, Jackie Ickx, Jim Clark, Pedro Rodriguez, Jochen Rindt, Rolf Stommelen. And the list of Porsche racing cars is just as impressive: 904, 906, 910, 907, 908, 917 Carrera, Turbo, 935 and 936. In 1969, Porsche won the manufacturer's World Championship for the first time. In 1970, 9 out of 10 races, and for the first time, the grueling 24-hour Le Mans. In 1971, Porsche made a hat trick by winning the manufacturer's World Championship for the third time in succession. In 1967, plans were drawn up for a development center to cope with the numerous development contracts, an increasing amount of safety research projects, and the heavy company involvement in racing events. The development center in Weissach, outside Stuttgart, was inaugurated in 1972. Only a small percentage of the development capacity is used for Porsche's own sports and racing cars. However, it's obvious that Porsche's other customers benefit very directly from Porsche's experience with its own vehicles. After all, racing events are the acid test for design and workmanship. In 1973, almost 1,000 people were employed in research and development. 1973 was the year of the dream sports car, the Carrera with a 2.7-litre 210-horsepower engine, Germany's fastest production sports car. It was a car which was destined to win many international long-distance racing events. However, the new Turbo is the model on which the Porsche 935, winner of the manufacturer's World Championships in 1976 and 1977, is based. In 1976, Porsche won the Sports Car World Championships and Le Mans with the 936, a sports car designed and built in record time. And then in 1977, as further proof of reliability, Le Mans. The victories and good positions in international rallies such as Monte Carlo, East African Safari, Acropolis, achieved by Porsche, are only a small part of the countless successes notched up by many private Porsche teams throughout the world. But Porsche was and is not solely preoccupied with car racing. Contemporary problems such as the conservation of energy and raw materials have a very direct bearing on future car design. The idea of a long-life car was evolved in the Porsche Development Center as a possible answer to the changing requirements in terms of longevity and construction materials for tomorrow's cars. In 1973, a model of the long-life car was displayed at the International Frankfurt Motor Show. The results of the intensive development activities during this period can clearly be seen in models such as the Carrera 3-litre, the 911, the 1975 Turbo, and in features such as the zinc-coated body pan with a 6-year rust-free guarantee. The fast 6-cylinder 1975 Turbo put the crowning touch to a highly successful product line. A quiet, safe sports car with extraordinary acceleration, developing 260 horsepower in its normal version and nearly 500 horsepower as a racing vehicle. It is a car which reflects the technological age in which we live, a fascinating piece of machinery which once again does justice to the name Porsche. In 1976, the 924, successor to the 914, went into production. This car's amazing ride and road holding are a guarantee for safety. The secret lies in the trans-axle system with front engine, rear wheel drive layout to ensure equal weight distribution. And finally, in spring 1977, the 928 was introduced and practically stole the show at the Geneva Motor Show. The 928 has a V8 4.5-litre water-cooled engine, trans-axle system and self-correcting Weissach axle. The 928 is yet one more example of Porsche's ability to find new technical solutions to the delight of the motoring press and Porsche customers alike. As a member of the Porsche board recently said, "We produce cars which no one needs, but everyone wants to have." Porsche is synonymous with driving at its best.